Welcome to Code and Country, where we explore the intersection of cybersecurity and national security and geopolitics. Today, we have a fascinating guest, Neil Bisson. Neil spent over 25 years in intelligence, national security, and law enforcement, serving with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, or CSIS, and the Canada Border Services Agency, also known as CBSA. His career has spanned counterintelligence, cybersecurity, and securing Canada's borders, giving him a unique perspective on today's evolving threats. And I think we're going to get into some very topical questions here. So, Neil, thanks for joining us. Maybe to start off with, can you maybe just talk about a little bit about your career journey and what drew you to this line of work?
Sure. First off, Ian, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be on Code and Country. It's an awesome podcast. So for me, I kind of got involved in law enforcement and national security from my educational background. So when I was a college student taking law and security, I thought I was going to get involved in either national policing or even municipal or provincial policing. So I ended up getting my first summer job with CBSA under the Federal Work Student Employee Program, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with one way or another. And because I was in Windsor, Ontario, which is a huge border town, as most people know, I had an opportunity to work there consecutively for approximately 3 or 4 summers. And then I got hired on part-time and then went to full-time. And just around when 9/11 happened, I was working in the intelligence department doing analysis for CBSA. And I thought, well, this is a good opportunity for me to throw my hat in the ring with the service, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. And in June of 2002, I was in Ottawa and working for the service. So it was a real career progression that kind of happened out of everything else that was going on in the world.
So one of the things that I'm really curious about is the intersection between physical threats and cyber threats. I was doing somebody else's podcast just a couple of days ago, and they were shocked and surprised that even in today's day and age that you still had physical manifestations of cyber threats or physical angles to cyber threats. And I would imagine in your background, you've probably seen a lot. So I'm curious, how do you see cyber threats intersecting with physical security risk, either at a corporate level or at a nation state level?
Well, we see cyber in almost every aspect of national security concerns, whether it be the communications between individuals who are trying to perpetrate a terrorist attack or state-sponsored hacking groups, whether it's an attack on the communication system, infrastructure, anything like that. So when I first started with the service, we didn't see as much when it came to the communication side because in the early 2000s, there wasn't as much of a burgeoning communication between, now you can basically be in contact with anybody instantaneously around the world. And the ability to talk to someone else or talk to a group of people and be confidential or obfuscate that communication just continues to increase and increase. So when we talk about what's the physical aspect of what's happening in cyber, I think we're looking at it from multiple perspectives. One of those being that we are so involved in the digital world as individuals, whether it be through our banking, whether it be through our communications, whether it be through our own infrastructure, whether it be through the energy that comes to our homes and into our vehicles. We're more connected than we've ever been. And our adversaries, whether they be state or non-state actors, realize this, and they will continually try to disrupt or somehow take advantage of that. Now, whether that be through cyber espionage, cyber attacks, or even just intercepting communications, it's all part and parcel of that national security threat that Canada has to face.
So sticking on that same theme, we're seeing a lot in the news with countries like China and Russia, I think deepening their levels of cooperation, be it cyber, be it intelligence, etc. What does that mean for Canada? How should we be thinking about a go forward where you have nation states who are opposed to us, deepening their level of collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, we might as well bring up the elephant in the room at this point. Our closest neighbor and ally, the United States, has kind of shifted their focus because of the new administration. So, what used to be considered a enemy or threat of all of us is no longer necessarily considered to be an enemy or threat of all of us. And we are seeing where the intelligence priorities, not only within their HUMINT, but also within their SIGINT, is refocusing and looking at the Western Hemisphere as opposed to looking at threats outside, like China and Russia. Because of that collaboration between Canada, the United States, and the other Five Eyes countries, with that shift, that paradigm shift, now we're looking at it from the perspective of, okay, can we rely on the information that's coming out of the United States, and will there be as much of it? So this gives an opportunity for whether it's Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan, India, any other country that feels that they can take advantage of this potential recalibration, it gives them the opportunity to do so.
I think that there'd always been a perception, I don't know if it was real or not, that countries like Canada were a net importer of intelligence from other countries. I mean, if the U.S. leaves or is no longer part of the Five Eyes in some way, shape, or form, do the rest of the Four Eyes actually have enough of their domestic capability to replace that, or is this going to have to necessitate investment in our own respective capabilities?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. So I don't know if the United States would ever consider, they might. I mean, no one can say with the current administration where the next uh, sense of madness is going to come from. But when it comes to the shared collaborative information between the Five Eyes, if any one of the partners decides that they're no longer going to be a part of that collection sharing, it would probably be detrimental to all. But at the same time, it's also, we have to, I don't mean to be cliche when I say this, but crisis and opportunity go hand in hand. So Canada, I think, is looking at this as, okay, how do we take advantage of this opportunity to shore up our relationships with maybe the UK or with Australia or with New Zealand if this happens? Because each one of these areas of the world are facing some sort of a threat from outside, whether it be Russia, whether it be China. Ourselves, we're looking at could be almost any one of those countries, whether it comes to foreign interference, whether it comes to cyber attacks. All of that is still an issue for us to deal with. So by reinforcing the relationships with those other countries, whatever country decides to drop out, I think it can be an improvement on the amount of communication that exchanges between one another, because we've had a reliance, the same way that we've had a reliance economically with the United States because of our proximity and our ability to trade. That's now kind of, been, for lack of a better term, threatened with the tariffs. The idea that the intelligence will now be focused more towards potentially economic gain for the United States as opposed to dealing with national security threats, that now, the same way economically we're seeing how we can kind of bring down provincial borders and deal with trade in a more efficient way, we can now take that into the intelligence field. And when that comes to what more do we have to offer the UK? What more do we have to offer Australia? What more do we have to offer New Zealand? Things that we may not have necessarily thought about previously, but now we have this opportunity to look internally and see, okay, what do we have to offer the world?
Where has Canada historically been, or do you think could be strong in the future? I'm thinking about this from the perspective of either strengths and weaknesses or differentiators. Like what are the differentiators Canada has and can bring to bear to offer these either existing allies or potentially new allies in a new intelligence sharing paradigm?
One of the things that I've noticed since my career in law and security, or sorry, in law enforcement and security, national security, was that Canada's diversity and just how much influence we have in the world is a huge advantage that we haven't even started to, to see the tip of the iceberg on. We have individuals around the world who are respected, who have dual citizenship, who or more, and who can basically provide information back to Canada that can then be shared with our other 5, 4, 3I partners, whatever you want to call it, whatever we end up with. And I think that the national security and law enforcement need to look at that when we're talking to our partners and say, what are some of your issues? What are things that you're dealing with? And how can we help you? Because we're going to want the same from your side of the fence too.
So one of the other areas of the U.S. Canada relationship right now that's being put into the spotlight is just border security. This idea that fentanyl is going south from Canada into the United States. How do you think about border security? I mean, is that the largest issue from your perspective? Are things coming from south to north that we're maybe not talking about? What are your thoughts here?
Um, I worked at the border for almost 15 years. So I had an opportunity to see what was coming into the country. And working in Windsor, Ontario, both the bridge and at the tunnel, I had an opportunity to deal with a high number of travelers and a high number of commercial goods coming in. So I think one of the biggest concerns that the Canadian Security, the CBSA, Canada Border Service Agency, was the number of illegal and undocumented firearms that were coming into Canada. So when I found out about the fentanyl czar and about the reasons or excuses that the current U.S. administration was using to try to force more pressure on Canada and then falling back on tariffs to do so, my biggest concern was there was no pushback. I didn't see a lot of pushback originally from Canada to say, well, you're talking about a drug that's going into your country that we have 1% or less than 1% of that's going into the United States. Yet we're seeing a high volume of guns coming into Canada that has an immediate effect on the quality of life of Canadians, whether it comes to crime or basically individuals being involved in shootouts. I mean, we see this almost on, I don't want to say a regular basis, but a more regular basis than what we used to see. People walking into a bar, shooting others, people driving by a house, filling it full of bullets. This has an effect on us as well. And to go back to the United States and say, if you want to talk about border security, it's a mutual concern. We're concerned about guns coming into our country. You're concerned about drugs going into yours. Let's work together to try to figure out how we can stamp this down.
So I'm from Vancouver. We see a lot of this on the West Coast, and it is a daily basis now. Every time I go check the news, there's talk about another shooting, and didn't used to be the case 10, 15, 20 years ago, or not that I recall. So it does seem like it's a significant issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we're going to see more and more of this because, you talk about economic pressures that are put on the American people. I'm not saying everyone's going to automatically turn into a gun runner or turn into crime, but you're looking at a country that has, I believe, 10 times the number of firearms that they have for every man, woman, and child living in that country. So it is a business, and it's a criminal business. And if it's drugs for guns, then it's drugs for guns. Or if it's, I need people in Canada to be enforcers, so I got to make sure enough illegal firearms go there, then that's going to happen too. So these issues are not mutually exclusive. If you want to talk about putting pressure on crime, then you need to talk about preventing those individuals who are involved in criminal activities from getting firearms. And that becomes a responsibility of the United States as well.
So one of the other things that we've been tracking quite a bit is just all of the talk of federal layoffs occurring, I think particularly in the intelligence community in the US. Seems to be that there's growing concern that these job cuts or reductions in force, whatever they happen to be called, could stretch into the national security domain as well. I'm just curious, from your perspective, how do these reductions in government staffing impact the view of national security readiness?
I think it's a bit of alarm for Canada and Canada's national security apparatus, because those relationships that are built at the higher levels with the executives and the managers, and even with the intelligence officers and the administrative staff who are in contact with each one another on a regular basis to try to share information. And when you're looking at the U.S. national security and intelligence apparatus, and there is basically a culling of such a high number of individuals, especially individuals with your 10, 15, 20 years experience, that means that those relationships that Canada has worked so hard to build and maintain, it is a personal relationship. If you have an executive in Ottawa who has a counterpart in Washington, and they know that they can pick up the phone and go through the proper channels to be in contact with that person as quickly as possible so that they can share information that's important, when they no longer know who they're reaching out to, or if it's no longer a priority, which is one of my biggest concerns, is that will Canada get the same access to information or sharing information? Because it goes both ways. If something happens in Canada that we need to let our American counterparts know about, if we can't get a hold of the right people at the right time, it could be disastrous for our relationship. And we're talking human lives here. Like, we don't know what could happen. So that's one of my biggest concerns, I think, is that by having so many people lose positions within the American national security apparatus, how do they fill that void? And are they going to be as receptive to the communication from Canadian counterparts?
So I'd love to understand how tariffs could potentially impact the country or businesses over the next couple of years. Obviously, been a lot of back and forth of what what will be applicable for tariffs, what will not, what the rate is going to be, etc.
Mhm.
If we take for granted that there will be some amount of tariffs on Canadian goods moving forward, and if we just assume that that's going to exist for some period of time, how do you see that impacting either Canada or Canada's relationships with other countries and therefore trade?
I mean, I think it's going to be difficult no matter what. I think it's gotten to the point that the message that we've received and that we will continue to receive from the current U.S. administration is that tariffs are coming and they're going to hit you hard. We've seen the rhetoric about Canada becoming the 51st state. We've seen that our own politicians have mentioned the fact that it's not just rhetoric, that is actually something that's trying to happen. And we have seen in the past that economic pressure put on a country, especially one that does as much trade as we do with the United States, can have a detrimental effect. We in the next year or less, we'll probably end up in the next couple of months, we'll probably end up having a federal election. So the issue that's going to be on the minds of Canadians is, well, how do we make sure that we don't lose our jobs? How do we make sure that our economy doesn't collapse? And how do we ensure that we don't stay in a recession that leads to a depression? And this has a big issue when it comes to what the current US administration is looking at. If they're looking at trying to cripple Canada economically so that they could basically come in and say, hey, listen, we're rich, we're going to take care of you, or we have all of the cards when it comes to going back to who has the cards and who doesn't have the cards, have all the cards to ensure that we can keep you safe from any other threats. A lot of Canadians are going to look at this, and especially with social media now and how prevalent social media is and the information that's being pushed out through social media. We talked before about some of these, like Russia, China. Well, what if you're looking at the United States now pushing an agenda on social media that says this is one of the reasons why we want to adopt Canada as the 51st state? And then you have Canadians questioning that. So, we're talking about a lot of different moving parts here that have an effect on Canada's national security, their sovereignty, our economy. It's all interconnected in one way or another.
On that theme of interconnectedness, how do you see these catalysts impacting the cyber landscape?
I think that now more than ever, the Canadian national security apparatus and intelligence collection apparatus has to look to see how can we best defend our sovereignty? How can we best collaborate with our partners who are still willing to collaborate with us? And how can we ensure that the information that's being presented to Canadians is not mis or disinformation? Because I think that's going to be, especially going into an election period, that's going to be one of the major concerns is, are Canadians receiving information that is true as opposed to something that is more advantageous for the current US administration?
Or the Russian regime or the Chinese regime.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing is, Ian, we're seeing this collaboration, or maybe we'll just call it the acceptance of the aspirations of the current Russian regime. We're seeing a point in our history where over the last, so many decades, we've had a Cold War. And even though the Cold War somewhat ended, now we're seeing this nationalistic and expansionist kind of mentality where it's like, well, we need to take over Greenland because it's part of our national security. We need to take over the Panama Canal because economically, why are we being treated the way we're being treated? Now, instead of collaboration, this is about capitulation. This is about, you're going to do what we tell you to do because we have we hold all the cards, or we have all the power. And it's going to get to the point, I believe, that all of these other nations are going to look around and they're going to say, how do we continue to deal with the most powerful economic and military country in the world when they're targeting us?
Neil, I think we could probably be talking about this for hours and hours and hours. The good
Mhm.
news, though, is that you do, in fact, talk about this for hours and hours and hours. What are some of the other shows that people can check out if they want to hear more from you?
Yeah, so since my retirement, I've done a lot of podcasting myself, and I do one show every week called the Global Intelligence Weekly Wrap Up, where I go through and I pull different top end stories from what's happening in the world of intelligence, terrorism, foreign interference, national security, and basically give a synopsis of the story and then provide the insights and intelligence from my 25 years of experience. So there's that. And then I also do a show called Intelligence Conversations, where I talk to other professionals from the intelligence field who provide their insights and thoughts about what's happening in the world. And I do Spies Like Us with two other professionals, Al Tredenick and Phil Gursky, who are also retired CSIS officers. Phil worked for CSE and Al worked for the RCMP. So between all three of us, we've got over 90 years of experience. So you got a lot of people talking about a lot of things.
No, it's good. It's good. Neil, super appreciate having you on the show today. I think we should probably do a follow on at some point because the landscape is shifting quite a lot. I got to tell you, I did not think we were going to be dealing with any of these issues coming into this calendar year, and yet here we are. So I
Mhm.
appreciate you being on, and look forward to chatting again soon.
Well, thanks for having me in. I really appreciate you and what you're doing. I think the more people that start to understand about what's happening in national security and intelligence, the better off we're all going to be.
Thanks, Neil.